Elliott Williams, defense attorney Shan Wu, and CNN senior political correspondent Abby Phillip. You know, Elliott, the former police officer who killed Daunte Wright, the 20-year-old in Brooklyn Center, was in court today, but a lawyer for Wright's family says the charge of manslaughter is just an initial step toward justice. So where do you see things going from here?
So look, prosecutors often charge something right out of the gate as the most obvious, readily provable offense, and certainly second-degree manslaughter here is readily provable. You have to prove that the individual was culpably negligent, where their behavior created such a risk of harm or death to other people that it's a criminal offense. Now, prosecutors, I assure you right now, Wolf, are debating whether they can bump this up or charge third-degree murder. That's complicated in Minnesota because right now the Minnesota Supreme Court is weighing how you can charge a police officer for a third-degree murder. It happened just in the last year, but they're weighing the question. But certainly they're talking about it. So yes, it is an opening. Who knows where plea negotiations or whether this goes to trial. But certainly second-degree manslaughter is a pretty clean charge here, and most likely the most obvious thing that most prosecutors would bring. I certainly would have charged it if I were the DA or the AG in Minnesota.
Yeah, which is smart. You know, Abby, Daunte Wright's mother says justice would be her son coming back home. So a charge or a trial, these things only go so far when you're the mother of a child like this.
Yeah, there's nothing that brings your child back after what they've experienced as a family, and so many people and mothers and parents in this country are experiencing the same thing. I think what is so frustrating about these situations is the feeling that, and I think one of Daunte Wright's family members said this a few days ago, if a layperson quote unquote accidentally shot someone, they would probably be arrested at the scene. And there's a feeling of frustration in the community that there seems to be always a different degree of justice or a different degree to the way that the laws are enforced when it comes to police officers in situations like this. You add on top of that that Daunte Wright's mother believed that her son had been pulled over for either expired tags or air fresheners hanging in the window. It's just a devastating situation to feel like a simple traffic stop can end with your child of 20, who's 20 years old, losing their life. It's a story that I think obviously too many mothers have been experiencing, and we've all been experiencing as a country for many years now.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. You know, Shan, I want to turn to the Derek Chauvin trial in nearby Minneapolis, only about 10 miles or so away. The defense rested after calling only 7 witnesses over 2 days. Compare that to the prosecution calling 38 witnesses. How unusual is a disparity like that?
It's not unusual, Wolf. The prosecution bears the burden of proof, so they really have to build their case from the ground up. And the defense can either sit back and take some pot shots at it, or they can affirmatively try to put on a case of their own, and that's what they tried to do here. I mean, they got a little bit of a windfall today because there's a big mistake, frankly, on the part of the prosecution over this carbon monoxide issue, but not unusual at all for there to be a much heavier parade of witnesses on the side of the prosecution versus the defense.
Omar, you're there on the scene for us. You have, there could be a possible verdict coming in the Chauvin trial, next week while protests continue over the police killing of Daunte Wright. What are you hearing? What are you seeing from the protesters, from members of the community where you are?
Well, the tension is higher than I think anyone thought it would be at this moment, because remember, we heard from both city officials here in Minneapolis and others that the most tense time was supposed to be next week while that jury was deliberating and while we were awaiting a verdict. The law enforcement officials here even had a threat level for the amount of people that you would actually see out on the street, and we went to that highest level a few days ago when we were supposed to go again next week. So you feel that on the law enforcement side, you feel that on the community side when when you go out to these protests in Brooklyn Center, people are frustrated. They want their presence to be known. And as you see both of these meld into one another, you can imagine that this frustration is only going to grow, because you remember next week is that funeral for Daunte Wright, and there will be a lot of people demonstrating in support of that, while also watching very closely to see what comes out of this verdict here in Minneapolis.
Yeah, that funeral is scheduled for next Thursday. The closing arguments are on Monday. Elliot, what does each side, the prosecution and the defense, need to do in their respective closing arguments?
So the defense is, you've seen what the defense is going to do, which is throw as much up there, the carbon monoxide, the heart disease, the crystal meth, the everything, and just see what sticks. The prosecution really needs to just make it simple. If you remember in Jerry Blackwell's opening, he said he didn't get up and he didn't let up. It was a pithy way to put it, which is that Chauvin put his knee on somebody. It was unreasonable. It violated the bounds of his training, and he knew what he was doing. Make it simple and tell the jurors, trust your heart and trust your eyes, what you saw. We all watched that 9.5-minute video, jurors. You did too. Don't believe what you're hearing from the defense. And if you strip away all of those dozens and dozens of witnesses and just make it a matter of simple common sense and appeal to their sense of judgment as jurors, that's the way to get into their heads and frankly their hearts on this.
Yep, it's going to be a huge week next week. All right, guys, thank you very, very much. Up next.